Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball! Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to the Don Sullivan Show, the show where we discuss all things science, technology, and computing on a level that can be absorbed and understood by your average teenager. I again am your host, Don Sullivan. I am today speaking from my home office in lovely Colorado. And again, I'm joined by my famous folk hero partner, Mr. Jersey Steve. Say hello, Steve.
Greetings from the Garden State, everyone. And just a reminder, please support our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by License Fortress, the industry's first and only software asset management firm to offer both a financial and legal guarantee at its highest level of service. Whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, or VMware, License Fortress helps organizations stay compliant, avoid audits, and save money. You can learn more at licensefortress.com. And please support our producer by visiting axtinc.com. That's AXTINK.com. Subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation, as well as run our website, all while researching a cure for baldness.
Still not working. Still not getting close. Now, maybe we have to have an episode on Rogaine or something for the guy. I don't know. We'll try that. All right. But first, at our lawyer's insistence, and believe me, they do insist, every time I need to read out the obligatory disclaimer waiver. All statements by the host and guests on the Don Sullivan Show are the personal opinions of the host and guests, all who agree that the following is the content or the following is the property of Xanalytics LLC to be used publicly and exclusively on the Don Sullivan Show. And everybody is shaking their heads, and we can continue. We can start off. And today we are privileged to be speaking with Marian Newsome, the founder of Ethical Tech Matters. This is a little different for the Don Sullivan Show. This is going to be on the periphery of the normal discussions of real hardcore science and technology and so on. But Marian is an IEEE certified AI lead assessor, and of particular interest to the audience of the Don Sullivan Show is Marian has a focus on making ethics accessible. And I'm really interested in how this is going to go, because I want this concept to be considered by the vast audience of the Don Sullivan Show. So, Marian, if I got it right, how else can you describe yourself? And please introduce yourself to us and the audience.
Okay, I am Marian Newsome. I have over 25 years in cybersecurity, privacy, and a little touch of product management. And so my focus on ethics, I came from a background before entering IT and cybersecurity. I come from a background, I was an immigration officer. And so they said, hey, we need someone to get into the computers and understand how we find the airlines for bringing in people who shouldn't come to the U.S. And so that's how I got into IT, really found a fascination with computers. And so I decided to leave that field and go into cybersecurity full time. And so I was a systems engineer at EDS back in the time where ladies had to wear dresses to work. So I would put on the bicycle shorts and go out and install systems. I've been an ethical hacker. I've been an IT auditor. And I've done strategic roadmaps. I spent 17 years at Dell before they decided, hey, maybe it's time for you to do something different. I had been going through a health scare for 5 years prior to that, and so I was ready for something new. And so basically, that's who I am. I have a passion for the Rangers. I know you guys are up in Jersey.
Oh, the Yankees just took care of the Rangers. Okay, so
I really don't want to get depressed about that or
the
start
World Series a couple of years ago.
You know what I'm saying? That's the only one we've had in so
That's
long,
it.
though.
Yeah.
So, very passionate about sports and about fairness and accountability. And so that's really how I kind of got into ethics.
I love that term ethical hacker. It seems like an oxymoron to start with, but it really is so insightful and it clearly, and you can add on to this, but what you're doing is you're trying to understand the vulnerabilities more than anything else in any particular system and make those vulnerabilities less vulnerable. Am I right about that?
That is true. And so basically, you are the same as a not a white hacker, a dark hacker. You're like they used to tell me you're a good girl gone bad, right? And so you are really you want to understand it. My personality is that I will ask why 5 to 6 times till someone just gets frustrated with me. So it was perfect for me. Why can I break this system? Why is this port exposed? Why are we doing it this way? And as my mom will tell you, I can break anything starting from the age of 3. And so it's just perfect for me.
That sounds great. I got two grandkids upstairs running around right now, which are proving that particular paradigm on a regular basis. By regular, I mean like every 10 minutes. So,
Well, it becomes a superpower over time. And
yes,
so,
it does.
yeah.
Einstein's one of the greatest statements Einstein ever made was that play is the greatest form of research, and it that is exactly what is happening during those times. And clearly, you took that into something that is so important here to this audience. And this is how I want to start off this discussion. I want to point out that the world focus we focus here at the Don Sullivan Show on all the nuances under this broad umbrella of science, technology, and computing. But today, as we focus on not what you can do, but what we should do with science, but particularly with computing, I want, if you could explain to the audience the considerations of ethics and even the study of ethics, why it's so important in the disciplines that are normally thought of in a very antiseptic and benign way. Why is it so important to study ethics in an area that's of science in general that is just science?
And so that's really why, right? So if we think about what ethics is, like you said, what we should be doing versus what we are doing. Um, but this is a discussion that goes, I'm glad you brought up Einstein. This gives me an opportunity to bring up my favorite ethicist is Socrates. If you look at the invent of just the written word, he saw that as a new technology that would change the way people thought, who should have access to it, what should be written about, uh, who was going to be displaced. So people who, the stone writers, those kind of things. So this is not a new topic, but it does come down to who controls the information, what information is being used. Are you open about it? Are you honest about what data are you using? Are you accountable? Is someone accountable in your company for what your AI does wonderfully that we hear about all the time in the press? But also, are you responsible? Who's accountable when those things that go wrong, those unexpected consequences, those algorithms gone wrong? And so that's the basis of ethics. Really, is transparency, accountability, and accessibility. And I think that is still an age old topic. And when we start to look at AI, we can put those in several different contexts. But basically, it comes down to transparency about your data sets. What data are you using to create these systems? Transparency. Are you really telling us that you're using our data or not? How are you using it? And then just inclusion and who has accessibility to this technology.
It's kind of interesting, and this is very contemporary, that Amazon just settled a suit with the government in regards to the recording that may or
Hmm.
may not have been happening. And I'll just sort of ad lib this here for the moment. That there's a great story that Stephen knows particularly well. I was in a major Vegas hotel a few years ago, and very very expensive place, as they all are on the strip, and and I was watching an episode of South Park, and it was as normally flippant and funny as it was. And they make fun of Alexa all the time, and they scream at Alexa all the time on that show. And then all of a sudden, my hotel room starts talking to me, and I had no idea why. And then I realized, oh my gosh, the Alexa is on, and South Park kids are waking up the Alexa. So it's obviously listening. And of course, most people don't have any idea that you can't just turn it off. You have to unplug it. So
Right.
I did. I unplugged it just because, this is a hotel room in Vegas. What could happen bad? And I went down to the front desk and I said, you realize that you got 1,500 rooms in this place and the Alexas are on and they're always listening. And we don't know if they're recording or not. And the person at the front desk had no idea what I was talking about. And I said, okay, fine. And I just stopped it. And I explained to him it was a violation of federal and state laws and blah, 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 blah. But they had no idea whatsoever. And I know that Amazon has just settled this, but this is where it kind of really gets into the strange, almost surreal world of who has data on what and what are they doing with it, right?
Right. And so when we look at data, we've consented to so many different things. I mean, growing up, I was used to if I went to the store and I said, "Oh, I want this," no one cared if they tracked it with a loyalty number. Nobody cared about that. It was just I gave you my money and I left. Now we go into the store, we have loyalty cards that are being tracked about our buying habits. What are we buying? That data can be captured for health studies. We have no idea the many things that we've consented to. And then from an ethical standpoint, we know the data that we have, what it should be doing and how it should be used. But what about the data sets that AI creates on its own? And so, who is actually saying, is there regulations and standards around how that data should be used, how that data is created? Is anyone auditing it? Because there are inaccuracies we know about ourselves.
So most people are familiar with including or the discussion of ethics in areas such as medicine, of course, and weapons technology, even energy policy. But your interest is in computing, specifically artificial intelligence. Now, why? What about artificial intelligence in particular um, is really of significance here?
So, for me, what's really significant is that we're talking about not only the displacement of people, but the replacement. If we look at the maturity levels of what we're thinking about, what AI will eventually be able to do, it's not only displacement, it's the replacement of people in certain circumstances. So the
A
impact on
lot.
society is going to be much more than the written word. I mean, I wasn't around.
Is that
Yes, my
ethical though,
nephew
or is it
might have
just
been.
business? Sorry to interrupt you, but is it ethical or is it just business? When you're talking about, you go to the NVIDIA conferences, we've done an episode on, I
Mhm.
roamed around it and I was followed by robots, dog robots and other robots and so on. And it's all here.
Dog ones are they're kind of scary,
It's
Don.
here.
I don't like those
They
dog
wanted me to pet them.
robots.
They were begging for.
I
Right.
like dogs, but I don't like the
So
dog
it's
robots.
here.
One of
And
them
is
had
it really
a gun in a video. It's
so, I mean, I'm digressing quite a bit, but is it business or is it ethics in that sense, the replacement aspect of it?
So the replacement aspect has society and business impacts. But we currently have about 6 companies who really control AI on a global level. And so when you think about what are their needs versus just societal impact needs, so you brought up healthcare. There's some phenomenal use cases for AI in healthcare, but there's also been some misuses. If we think about and not to bang on about United Healthcare because they've had some issues here lately. But their subsidy, Optimum, had a case not a couple of years ago where they were using patient data to actually decide who receives treatment, and it was based more on payment. So
Of
those people
course.
who are disadvantaged, right? We're disadvantaged, we're not getting the same level of care, high denial rates, etc. That impacts your everyday life. That impacts people's ability to show up for work, show up for their families. And so when we talk about AI in a business sense, it does expand and have an impact on society. But for me, my interest came in because I am a person who asks why 6 times. Is we hear this term artificial intelligence. It's been out in the universe since 1956, if we really think about the history of AI.
Yes, Pat
But my
Gelsinger would
first,
refer to it as a 50-year overnight success story. So,
right, totally agree with that. So when we hear the term artificial intelligence, my first question is, what intelligence? So if I look in the dictionary, there are 3 different contexts that intelligence can be described, right? And so my definition of intelligence may be totally different than you Jersey guys. I'm a Texas girl. So how we define intelligence is, can you get around every day? Can you bring dinner out of the woods? Things like that. That may be my definition of intelligence. For you guys, it may be something totally different.
oh yeah.
So first of all, we don't even
Well, if
have
somebody calls you a wise guy or says you're being smart in New Jersey, it's totally something
And these
else.
guys know
Right.
nothing about talking out here, you know.
And so so we have to start there. Who's defining what is intelligence? And what are we making artificial and honestly available and accessible from an intelligence standpoint? And so when we look at that, that's where our data comes in. If they decide intelligence is what I'm posting on social media, we've got a problem. If they're deciding what's in textbooks, that doesn't go to the practical application that everyday people have to walk around and use. We've both talked about, have experienced companies taking a different shift, laying off people. Those skill sets go out the door, but there is some knowledge there. It's called tribal knowledge. Is that intelligence? So if you start there and you say, well, why are you collecting my data and what are you using it for? What is this intelligence that you're creating? That goes to, again, that transparency of data. I have to consent to it, but how many times have you downloaded some new software and just click, hey, I just agree, I want to
Pretty
get
much
to the
every
game, I
time.
want to get to the
Yep.
functionality.
It's
Right,
like 30 pages long. Nobody
right,
reads that whole thing. You just scroll to the bottom, click yes,
right.
because you want it. You need it.
Exactly. And so, what should be done there? Should I have to sit there and go through pages and pages of consenting to give you my data, the terms of use? Is that the right approach? Should it be opt in or should it just be default? I opt out. And then if I want to opt in, then I can contact your customer support. Are you taking advantage of my need for convenience? And so when we look at
That's an
just
interesting way to phrase it. That's particular. I want the audience to hear that again. Your need for convenience.
Yeah. We're impatient.
Yeah.
right,
That's a particularly
want to sit and read the
it's particularly
thing. I want an
acute in
easy
America,
solution.
right? Yeah.
It is.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we consent to things just because, hey, I want it now. I don't have time to sit here and read this. Why come you can't do this another way? Why aren't you? They're taking advantage of us from a business perspective. It's to their advantage for us to opt in by default so they can use our data. I heard people
Yeah.
say that data is the new oil. And so we
Yeah.
look at oil
Yeah.
and
In
they
the
don't
sense
call
that
them
it's
all,
fueling everything.
it's fueling everything. And it is the
Oh,
one commodity that is reusable, resellable as many times as many uses that those companies can think of.
and energy is also not exactly an open playing field either.
Not at all. They
It's
don't.
also in control of, a few powerful organizations and groups, and probably was the cause for certain wars over time. So,
Right. They
yeah,
don't
that's,
All
call them
wars are
oil
economic.
cartels for nothing, right?
yeah.
So, uh, and you look at the impact on society of looking at the countries that have taken oil and really kind of raised the standard of living. They've changed their whole society based on the wealth of oil. So we really start to think of that the new oil is data. Who controls that data? What's in those data sets? Not only what we have conveniently given them access to, uh, but also the data it creates behind the scenes. AI has the ability to match pairs of data about you, create digital twin personas of you, to be able to understand you from a buyer's perspective. Uh,
Yeah.
it has the
You know,
potential to do a lot.
There is an interesting, and we of course focus on the metaphors and the examples and the wisdom in sports, particularly baseball, all the time. And there is on the show, and there is a Supreme Court case from 10 years ago that, very interestingly, half of them recused themselves of, in particular Scalia, that focused on the fantasy baseball data, the metrics, and whether or not the data was actually private and owned, as opposed to what became, in terms of college sports, the names, image, and likenesses. They didn't use those terms, but it was the same thing. And the decision of the few justices that remained in, because most of them actually were participants in fantasy sports, was that no, the data was not owned by any individual, as long as the data was separated from the individuals themselves, but that their likenesses and their numbers, even or whatever else that was directly associated with them, was theirs or their franchises, their team's property, but the data itself was public. So
it's interesting, and that's a great business
that's where
kind
the
of
entire
sports example.
Fantasy sports world comes from, which also has fueled the present sports betting system, which
this is true, and there's a ton of money behind it, but there are also examples of the growth of facial recognition technology. I forget the name of the book, but there was an app where if you took a picture of somebody's face, it would basically, it had access to all the online, all the social media, this and that. It would figure out who it was, kind of like out of the movies. I forget the name of the app, but there was a book on it because it's actually fairly disturbing. And I think some law enforcement agencies started to use it, but it wasn't perfect either. Sometimes it would think it recognized somebody, but it was somebody else. And, when you're talking about law enforcement uses, obviously, that's pretty substantial. You get the wrong person, that's an injustice.
Well, it's an immense technology in the sense that, and it's so interesting that they kind of dusted off this terminology of artificial intelligence that effectively was from Star Trek and the Jetsons 50 years ago, and then used it for what we know of as really machine learning with unfathomably powerful processors with infinite amounts of data and enormous ability to mathematically or arithmetically really extrapolate, interpolate, extend, and so on. And there's really nothing more to it than that. It's just so much more powerful. And one of the things that really coincides with what you were just describing, Marian, is that, and I've said this a number of times in other shows, that it doesn't, and I might really be missing the point and be very naive about all of this, but it doesn't bother me as much right now. What's going to bother me, or what's going to be really interest me, is, to be honest, is when they get to artificial intuition, when they really start truly mimicking neural networks, as opposed to now modeling it on a very, very primitive level. And at the point when, like, for instance, there's a, I don't mention the article or the company here because it probably is pretty inflammatory, but there's a situation in which there was an experiment done very recently in which an HR department, a virtual HR department based totally on AI with its employees, fired someone, fired an artificial employee. And the artificial employee within the simulations actually started threatening the HR virtual employees and started coercing them, even blackmailing them. And this was totally unexpected by, supposedly at least, those folks who were running this experiment. And this really is something out of Hollywood. It's
like Ex Machina or something. This is
where Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Cruise get together and do something you don't really want to think about in your dreams.
Oh man, that is yeah. The implications
So
of
the
where it could
segue in
go
that
are
is
pretty
that
disturbing.
generative AI, which we certainly know of as this in ChatGPT, obviously, and many others at this point, whether it's Gemini or Grok, is capable of producing an enormous amount of content, stealing content.
Right.
The line of which something is actually copied versus iterated from so many different sources to create some piece of content, a book even. I mean, can artificial intelligence go out there and rewrite Moby Dick and change a few words of it? And is it actually a unique creation or not? And the same is true with fine art and so on. I'm still going to argue that it's not, and it's visibly different. But that's I think a different discussion. But my real question is and the segue is, so the fabrication of images and other things is really dangerous, almost to the point where we can't trust videos or images. I have an interesting issue with a particular video of Jackie Robinson stealing home against Yogi in the 1955 World Series, which I don't believe is real. But that's another discussion again, which we'll have. So all of that's there. But I think a bigger problem, and please, add on to this, Marian, and tell me if I'm wrong. I think the bigger problem is going to be when we get to actual predictive AI as opposed to generative AI. When you really can start predicting people's behavior and other things that you can predict, which
like the Minority Report phase of it,
like the stock market or like sports betting and so on. Now, am I right? Do you think I'm right in that concern? Again, this goes with the artificial intuition.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because I look at the current age of AI, the generative AI, as really being kind of a specialist or an assistant, right? So to use your kind of baseball analogy, if I need to close a game, I'm bringing in, Riviera. I'm bringing in Mariano Riviera.
I always would. You can learn everything in life from Mariano Rivera. So there you go.
Your stock just went all the way up, Marian.
This show is going to the top of the queue, Steve. Put us up there.
I'm not just going to pull someone off the bench. And so right now it really does really specialized tasks and really kind of linear tasks. You ask me to do something, I can do this. Now, the speed at which it does all of those different things, we're impressed with. Oh, it's like shiny and new. But I do agree, when we start getting into the intuitive AI, and we start getting into what we call super intelligence AI, that's where we have an issue. But if we don't establish what we should be doing with AI now, there are countries that have regulations like the EU and some Asian countries around the use of AI and the standards that are out there. They can't keep up fast enough. And so we're not dealing with the ethics of what it should be doing, what data it should be having, how it should be used now. When we really get down to intuitive AI fueled by these quantum computers, we're going to be in trouble. And so the Minority Report, not too far away. If we look at the recent case of 23andMe, they went bankrupt. They had people's DNA data. Right.
I love that you're bringing this up. I read this the other day and I was like, oh boy.
Yeah. And so I'm going to age myself. Over 25 years ago, I wrote an article around the Toy Smart bankruptcy. That was just toys and what happened to your consumer data, how you did your data privacy that you signed up for. How's that going to be disposed of? Was that going to be sold along with other company assets? So now we get to 23andMe, where it's DNA data that can tie. It's used for, it's off the book uses. I know that's not the technical term, but off the book uses by law enforcement, right? The familiar DNA to catch criminals, even serial killers out in California. And so we're talking about something that is uniquely yours, uniquely identifiable, that can be traced not just your privacy, but the people in your family who may not have consented at all for you to go off and try to find out, are you related to Genghis Khan? And it could be used for their arrest, right? And so
Larry Ellison would be very happy with that, by the way. I just think he talks about that.
Well, so I am a
believes it.
part-time I'm a part-time genealogist, and so Genghis Khan is one of the six most uh, popular DNAs. And if you think about, I don't want to get us off track because I love Genghis Khan and that kind of thing too, but not to the Larry Ellison. I'm not, yeah, not
Yeah,
worried about it.
that's an interesting the it's six degrees of 6 degrees of separation
Right,
over 1,000 years, right?
right.
800.
So
That's
when,
Yeah.
fascinating.
yeah, but when you think about it now in this 23andMe bankruptcy, they were collecting DNA and using it to kind of say that, hey, your DNA carries potential or a higher propensity for vitamin deficiencies, anxiety conditions, the way you should work out. And so, and now we're not talking about just what did I buy at a store. We're talking about basically who I am, what created me. It's not only my data privacy, it's the people in my family's data privacy if those databases are can be accessed by law enforcement for familiar DNA. And so now we're talking about thinking about going to the future, all the data that will be available. Facial recognition, you bring it up. TSA is now taking supposedly, I can't
Oh,
say
the pictures they're
I'll be at
yeah,
taking.
the
they're
airport
taking
in
the
a couple of
pictures, right?
hours.
Uh,
Oh yeah, they did that to me in Denver. Yeah, they're taking pictures of you now.
right. And so they take a picture. It's supposedly, allegedly temporary. It's not stored
Nothing's
anywhere.
temporary. Once it's out of the
Right.
bag, it's out of the
Hey, I taught
bag.
backup
Come
recovery in Oracle
on.
for a decade, and you can keep
It's like a secret.
everything.
Once you
Right.
tell it to one person, it's going to
And what
get
is that huge
around.
data center west of Salt Lake City for
Right.
anyway?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so how many
I don't
people
know.
knew that they have the right to can say no? You can say I don't consent to being identified that way.
I read an article on
Um,
that
Yeah, and
too. Yep.
probably none. I didn't. It's not like they tell you, and then you worry about not being able to get to your flight. It's the last thing you're thinking
it's
about when you're
convenience,
in
right?
line at the
Like I
airport. You
said,
just want to
need
get
for
through.
convenience. That's why I
It's
wanted
it's
to
back to
Head to
convenience.
circle
Starbucks
back
and
on it.
wait for your flight. You're not
Right.
thinking about fighting with the TSA there.
So,
But yeah,
so
you're absolutely
Marian, now that
right.
you've filled our heads with sufficient number of nightmares, what keeps you up at night?
So the thing that really keeps me up at night is the just the thought of how much data on me is out there, how it can be used to not only determine my behaviors now, but as you said, that intuitive AI. So now we have AI who it's in every facet of our lives. And we talk about the distrust of AI, the hallucinations in AI, but I bet if you go out and ask people, they're using it all the time and they're pretty confident in the answers that it's given. And so, what keeps me up at night is just this default to trust AI or ChatGPT by default. We have people who are using it as companions. No judgment. That's your thing. That's your thing. Um,
It's true.
but if that is my go to person, which has no emotions, has not been humanized, there are use cases and tests and research going on in how we can humanize AI to be more empathetic. Um, but there are people who are people's companies, nations even trusting AI and the case studies, the data, the decisions that it makes to make some pretty critical decisions.
I
If we
noticed
look,
that
Yeah.
Ethical Tech Matters tweet in which you have, and maybe you did it unintentionally, but you have sort of extended the famous Ronald Reagan quote of "trust but verify," when the statement was, "I never trust and always verify."
exactly.
Yeah.
It's
And so
probably good advice.
So that's what we really need to do with AI, right? I see people, but that's what keeps me up at night. This default to just be confident and trust the information because we just think, oh, it is already in that super intelligent, intuitive mode. But AI is only as good as the data that runs it. And so when we start to think about Oh yeah, it told me it. I didn't put the prompt in right, or I didn't ask it right, and it brings me an answer back. We say, oh, that's on me. But it does hallucinate. It
Oh yeah.
does
That's an amazing concept that we have.
It can be manipulated as well. I think
exactly.
the AI, I think the large language models are going to AI is going to end up being the next battlefront for information warfare. We saw what happened with social media. We saw the extremes of both sides with respect to censorship as well as with respect
Hmm.
to just believing anything you heard on the internet, no matter how crazy. And
Hmm.
I think it could very very easily roll
Well, the
into
self-validation
you
aspect of it is incredibly
yeah, I
Right.
think that could
prevalent as
happen
well.
very easily with the AI models, especially if they're not transparent. You're
Mhm.
you're in a pretty similar situation, except they just work a whole lot faster.
So,
Right.
um, you want to give us any?
I'd like to expand on that just a little bit,
Yeah,
and then
please.
to so they do act faster, and we have them in every aspect of our lives, right? And so you brought up the Amazon issue in the hotel. Um, there are uses of AI in things like your smartwatch, right? So if I'm wearing my fitness tracker and my fitness watch, um, they're now putting AI into those things, right? And so things that we look at as totally unharmful devices, uh, what I call innocent domains, right? So we look at baby monitors, we look at fitness watches, we look at alarm systems, all these refrigerators in our home. These are innocent domains that now use AI that are actually in our homes. How is our data that we're in the privacy of our homes actually being used, collected, used? And then also, how is that data actually being sold? Is it being packaged? Is it being all of those questions? Is it actually just used? To make the refrigerator make ice faster because you
Well,
consume
in
more
the Internet of
ice?
Things, we are the ultimate edge devices ourselves.
Right. Exactly. I love
True,
that.
and we've done it to ourselves out of convenience.
Yes, that's why that was a
They didn't
great
need
point.
to. They didn't need to spy on us. It was a great point. We all happily went out and bought smartphones
Without considering any
Right.
of
and
this.
brought all of this
Well,
into our
and see,
home.
this
TVs
is
too.
sort of the next little point here that I think is really important. What really scares me is how ignorant I know I am. In other words, what I haven't even considered. Because you look at the last 18 months and the acceleration of the technology is incredible. It's exponential. And there's no reason to think that's going to stop in terms of the software, the usage model. And again, as I mentioned, going eventually into the point of real artificial intuition. Where do you think this is going, Marion?
So I'm not a doomsday caser where I think AI is going to
So you're
take
not
over
quite
the
on Musk's
planet and the
level of
world.
thinking the whole
No,
world
I'm
is going
not.
to be, yeah.
No, I'm not because um, I think we do have people like myself, like you guys, who you say, "Oh, I don't know a lot," but you probably know a lot more than the average. You know more than the hotel clerk sitting
Yeah,
there
I'm,
with
I'm
it
at a
every
point of,
day.
of, of um, conscious incompetence. I know that I don't know much.
Right, and it changes so fast every day, right? Every day there's a new model. There's this race, almost like the space age. There's this race to get to the moon. There's this race to get to Mars. There's this race to have uh, a better AI, a cheaper AI, without any real consideration to impacts on the environment, on actually making people aware. And when we look at different communities, especially rural communities, disadvantaged communities, they're getting left behind. We still have areas here in Fort Worth where kids don't go home to a computer to do their lesson every night. So we still have people in the digital age that are being left behind. We still have people in rural areas that don't have readily access to the internet. And so there is a need to advocate for education in this area, not only as to how it's used, but what is it? We started this kind of with what is intelligence, but what is AI? A lot of people, if you say that to them, they have no clue what it is. It's a term they've heard on the internet.
Hey,
There have
hopefully
been,
they'll listen to the Don Sullivan Show episodes about this and listen to you, Marian, for this and episodes that we'll have in the future, and they will become aware.
right. So, but we still have a large population. We don't acknowledge this.
Very.
We have a large population of people who still don't have access to just the basics to even work with AI, even to be educated on AI. The terms we use in AI, we're very technical about, oh, yeah, the LLMs, we go on and on. But if I'm an everyday person walking down the street, what I know about AI is ChatGPT. I may or may not have it on my phone. I may have it. I go somewhere to the doctor's office and they're telling me, oh, yeah, we've got this new AI assistant that you can use through the portal. We have people in this country who primary access to services is the telephone. So, are we advocating for these people to be included in this kind of race to the Mars? And I use that loosely with AI. Are we including them in these changes and impact in society?
Well,
We
I
have a
have
lot
always
of
argued,
dialogue.
and I need to interrupt you here, but you're obviously speaking from an ethical perspective. I'm speaking about it from a economic perspective, a business perspective, that having large numbers of people, whether they're inside the United States or as I ran uh, the virtualized Africa program at VMware, part of our
Hmm.
mission was, and we told the universities this, that we weren't there trying to just be do-gooders and help the world. We were there for business reasons, that this was a
Hmm.
tremendous opportunity for enormous populations to become customers and to become involved and to become capable and to contribute to this boom in technology. And we wanted everybody to be involved in it. And that's what Pat Gelsinger wanted us to do. And we did. And I think that applies
Hmm.
inside the United States as much as it applies to even what we would refer to loosely as the third world.
Seems like it'll be a mixed bag. If you look at the internet was, it was certainly supposed to be, and I think to an extent it did, was supposed to be this kind of flattening or equalizing force that provided everyone with access to information and access to each other. And I think to a large degree it has done that. But you can still see a lot of inequality there. I mean, probably not as much as was in the beginning, but uh, I don't think it'll. I think it'll be a mixed bag.
But it's
That's
still
an
a
easy
business,
prediction.
right? So, if we want
Yeah.
to bring the business discussion into it, social media is a business. There's a reason that people go to TikTok for the algorithm to sell products versus Instagram. Uh, and to your point earlier about business and investment, I recently attended LEAP 2025, which is Saudi Arabia's them and deepfaked. I'm sorry, Deep Learning's conference, where they talked about their investments in AI, and they're significant. The smart cities that they're planning, um, just to see their investment in AI. And so we talked earlier about the oil economy. They have the money to invest in technology. They have a population that's very diverse and hungry to continue to change and continue to transform in ways that they've had over the past 50 years. And so we start looking at it as a business. And so the investment in AI doesn't mean it's ethical. It also doesn't mean it's innovative. It also doesn't mean it's something that we actually really need. It's something that's being commoditized. And there will be people left behind. We talk about jobs. Um, that's a business perspective. We have to have people pouring in, having an income to have a disposable income to keep just the economy going. We have AI in stocks now. We have AI that sits around in a collective and trades with each other. I think you've probably heard the story or read the articles about this AI group of computers that got together, and they're kind of investment syndicate, and right, they're very successful. And so if people don't have jobs, to actually contribute to an economy strictly, if we go to the doomsday case, strictly by robots, strictly by mega computers, what happens to the people? That becomes
We're going to have to band together, Marian, and we're going to have to fight the elites. They're going to have their robot armies. And we're going to have to fight them.
but we're commoditizing the very thing that makes us human. Our ability to
That
make
too.
decisions, our ability to say, this is what I want my children to learn. This is how I want my data used. This is what I want in my home, whether it's for convenience or not. We're commoditizing the very thing that makes us human. We start to humanize AI. We're probably the only species on Earth that sits up and thinks of ways that we can innovate to replace our very species.
That's incredible circular logic. And Marian, we're running out of time here a little bit, but I really do want to get a couple of more questions here. Who should, in your opinion here, who should really be in charge of this? Who should be in charge of leading the discussion, leading the determination as to what ethical principles should be applied and what the ethical limitations are? I mean, I know Elon Musk would have it would be him, but what do you think?
So that's a hard one because right now no one is, right. So to really be able to determine who should be,
Because I don't know about you, but I'm not going to just blindly trust the government, right? And you,
oh no,
And we
that's not
trust
my
any
thing.
one person with all that power,
Yeah.
though, Don.
Right.
You know,
And so we look at collective standards, we look at collective bodies, we look at universities, but I do think that there should be advisory boards that sit at an international level to just decide the standards. Let's just start there. Let's just rally around one standard. We've got NIST out there. We've got IEEE, which I'm a huge advocate for. We've got the European Union and the EU Act. We have so many different standards. Let's just start there. Let's just start by all agreeing that this is what AI should be doing. This is what we should be aware of and look for in all these systems that we're out here creating.
well, if I
Let's
could
just
put you on
start
the
there.
spot for a moment, and you don't have to answer this if you really think it's inappropriate, but if you could make one rule, what would it be? If you were king, queen for a minute, and you could make one rule to say this is where it has to start, or this is something that
the
has
queen
to
of
be,
AI.
what would it be? Yeah.
My one rule would be transparent
With everything.
about the data you have.
With everything. We need to know
Everything.
We need to know
The
damn well right now
algorithm.
who killed JFK.
Yeah, I think we've got several people who can weigh in on that.
Yes,
and
I
then
know.
there's redacted files that have come out. So that's where we talk about transparency. They say, oh, we're going to release the files, but they're redacted. That's not transparency. That's still
There's still
controlling
85-year-old
information.
CIA guys out there who are embarrassed.
The old bait and switch. That's all
right.
that is.
So yeah, it would be, hey, you need to be transparent about what you have, what you're doing, and what you plan to do with it.
Well, Marian, this has been absolutely wonderful, and we've missed lots of things here. For instance, we're going to be having a number of different discussions in the near future on quantum computing and where that's going, and of course that takes us in a whole different, multiple order of magnitude, different directions of power and whatever else we're considering, and I hope that you haven't been scared off by us Jersey guys and you're willing to come back on and discuss some of this as we get more into our episodes and as I said before, the technology increases exponentially. I hope to be able to reach out to you as a friend of the Don Sullivan Show, because this has just been wonderful. But I do want to give you an opportunity as we end up here on this episode. Did I miss anything that you really want to add into this discussion?
I don't think so. Been pretty broad, and like I say, I'm a real advocate for the transparency and the accountability of AI. what we should be doing, who should be doing it, and why are we doing it. So I think we've covered those topics.
Well, and I
And you
know.
didn't rain on my Ranger, so
Yeah, well, I don't know about this year. This is a strange year, But I was always a fan of Nolan Ryan. All right, he started with the Mets, and I was always a fan. But Marian, I really want to thank you for doing this and having this discussion with us. And I know, to answer my own question to you from before, if there was somebody that I ever met that I'd want to see in charge right now, it would be you. So,
no, thank you. Thank you.
There you go, queen of AI.
And absent
we
that
have to get
little
you
bit
back,
of suck
Marian.
up, but it's true. We're going to have to end this episode of the Don Sullivan Show. Steve, you want to say goodbye here to our audience?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marian. Appreciate you coming on. And I don't know if anybody mentioned it, but 23andMe was bought by a pharma company.
Oh, that should help.
News lately.
For that very reason.
Yeah,
that's going to be
there
great.
You go.
Yeah, inherent traits. Yeah. That very
All
reason.
right. Well, on that sour note, one more thing. Support our sponsors.
All right. Marian, anything else?
No, I want to thank you very much for having me on, and I would be honored to be back on your platform.
That's
thank
great.
You so much, Don.
Thank you so much. And I want to remind the audience, remember, download all the episodes, listen to them, and folks, remember, every at-bat is situational.